All right, I want to talk about a couple different parallel processing techniques that I'm using in this production mix. And we're going to be looking at this little skit, this dialogue excerpt down at the bottom here, and how I used it to end the song. So I wanted to do two particular things here that I wanted to have the wet effects overtake the dry vocals, while still having them both fade out at the same time. And then I also wanted to be able to send wet and dry stems to our mixing engineer. So I couldn't just put a reverb on the dry track and automate the mix, because I'd be losing the dry stem in the process, and I also lose the control over the presence of both the wet and the dry in the mix. So I'm going to play the track, and then I'll break down the different elements of what's going on in this section. And it's by an artist from out in New Jersey named Rocky's Rain. We've been working on this record for a while now, and we're really happy with how it sounds. And we put a lot of time and effort into finding new ways to explore space. So give this a listen, and we'll see what we can pick apart.
And when it's satisfying your soul, you don't care about differences. It's like whatever, it just becomes what that thing is. A term we use often is if I got it, you got it. So there is no one left without. And how does that work? Universal. If that mentality is adopted on a macro scale, how does that work? I'm thinking, I'm like, hold up. We have affinity for each other. Every living thing has affinity towards each other.
So if we're going to break this down, we've got a dry track down at the bottom, really light compression and de-essing. And then I sent it to a group. I sent it to an aux channel to do all my fade out processing and all my effects processing from here. And there's a couple, bandpass filters, a little bit more compression, and some limiting. And at the end, I actually wrote all of the fade out parameters from this EQ plugin. You can see in this wet track that I'm both fading out and I'm automating the high pass. And I did that because I could enable and disable the fade out, which was super helpful when trying to get other elements in the mix to fit well sonically. So that's the first kind of cool thing that I think is happening here. That I don't normally do my dry processing and then send it to an aux channel to do my wet processing. But it's it gives some sort of freedom and independence, and I can see things differently. But onto the cool stuff. So I've got two effects sends that I'm routing pre-fader, and this intro effects is a chain that I used earlier in the session, and I wanted to reuse it in order to keep the continuity between the beginning and the end. So what I think is kind of cool about this is, and a lot of people might be doing this already, but using one effects bus and having multiple aux channels use it as their input. So I'm sending from one track and I'm branching it off into more than one track. And it's really great so we don't have to stack effects on things. It's a real good economy of motion thing where we don't have to create a one-to-one send to aux channel relationship where we can send one track to 4 aux channels using a single send. And that's great for global channels. If you want a global reverb, a rear bus, some saturation, and none of those parameters are going to change over time. Or maybe you've got a drum group that you want to send to a parallel compression, to a plate reverb, to a hall reverb, to a distortion. And again, none of those elements are going to change during the mix. If they're all just static effects, I'm going to be reaching to things like this a lot more often in the future. So that's cool thing number 2. Cool thing number 3 is that these are pre-fader sends. And what's useful about pre-fader sends is that they maintain their independence from the aux channels, right? They're pre-fader. So I don't have to worry if I've done any prior volume automation, that I'm just focusing on the wet effects here. But there is a part of doing the fade out from this EQ that that defeats the purpose of doing a pre-fader send. But for this particular kind of effect and the way that this needs to be executed, that this must be pre-fader. There does need to be some post-fader element to this fade because that I want to fade both the wet and the dry signal out at the same time. So although it destroys the utility of the pre-fader sends here, it links the wet and the dry track together so everything fades out smoothly. And point number 4, cool thing number 4 sort of brings up the final form of this process where we're taking this pre-fader identity and we're like turning it into a duplicate track. So essentially this is a duplicate track. This effects skit end FX is a straight duplicate of this ending dialogue group that I have here. And the benefit of doing it from an aux send is like, A, I don't have to use as many plugins, and like B, processing aux channels is better on the CPU, and it's just the way that I would prefer to see a session organized. So the way that I have things routed right now, I feel like I'm taking the most practical parts from both parallel processing and from like track duplication, and I'm doing them in the same space. So for instance, if I wanted to add an exciter or if I wanted to add a chorus effect to the dialogue track, it would translate to all of its aux sends, that the tracks are linked in that way. But because of the way that I'm treating the effects track here, it's behaving more in the way of a printed full wet duplicate, where it has its own independent volume and fader identity. It's receiving the processed signal and it's like decoupled from all of the volume automation changes that exist inside this track already. So I'm gonna play this one more time. Y'all can watch the EQ move as it fades out, and let me know in the comments, is this just parallel processing? Am I making too big of a deal out of this? Does anybody else use their routing in this way? So until the next one, thank you all and have a happy mixing.
A term we use often is if I got it, you got it.